thank you very much. It's great to be here. I'm going to start out with some takeaways, which you've had time to digest up there. They're pretty simple and probably not a surprise to anybody in this room. I'm going to start with the infrastructure problem that we have out there. It is real. It is serious. And in a few short years, I'm going to talk about a little later, in the Metro District, we are done spending any money on adding capacity to our state highway system, unless we get new revenue from the legislature. So that's a pretty bold statement right there. And one of the good things is the first part of that last clause. Everybody agrees there is a need out there, but the bad news part of that is it's now down to politics, and I stress a capital P there. So thank you very much for inviting me here today. And mentioned, I'm Scott McBride, and I do actually want to finish off my spring break story because I did go down to Acapulco, Mexico. It's a beautiful place just south of Cancun. One reason it was memorable is because one afternoon we had an iguana on our balcony. It was down there. It was my son's senior year of high school spring break trip. We went down with another family. They also had a young woman that was a senior, and we heard a blood-curdling scream come from our patio. Turns out there was an iguana on the railing of our patio that was about this long, which in and of itself is not that remarkable, except for it had an iguana about this long in its mouth. And it took about 45 minutes for that thing to eat the other iguana. That was a pretty remarkable spring break experience for everybody involved. So that's just a story. But thanks again for inviting me. I love coming to NCITE because it's great spending time with, of course, we've got some MnDOT staff here, but we have local city, county partners in the room. We have our academic partners in the room as well. We have our private industry partners in the room. And so it's great just to touch base with everybody here. Friends of a long time here, a lot of new friends here as well. And every time I come here, I meet new people. So I just love coming to this group and speaking to people. On the other hand, it is a bit daunting to come to a group like this. It's nice to preach to the choir, but the choir knows a lot about the sermon as well. So I can't get away with anything here, especially when I look around the room, the old farts in the room. You got guys like Eiler, Alderson, Campbell here. They remember when T used to stand for traffic in the name of this organization. That's how long they've been around. And you can't get anything by these guys. But it's also nice to see the younger people in the room. For you old guys, they pull out their phone. They're not actually texting their friends. They're doing real-time traffic signal adjustments based on customer feedback, real time. So they're actually changing traffic signals while they're sitting here. So they're running the gamut of ways to do traffic right now. They don't need paper and pencil anymore getting to come up with good ideas.
I should get that app. And then I signals I go through.
And I was able to, in this room, I was able to actually thank Ken for putting some flashing yellow arrows on those damn signals that have been vexing me for a few years right by my house. So it's awesome. Thank you again. Oh, last thing I'll say about this slide is what I'm going to do today is I have taken slides. This is from Commissioner Zelli's presentation that he has been going around the state selling Governor Dayton's transportation proposal for. So I'm going to use a lot of his information in this, and I'll give you a lot of input or a lot of information that Commissioner Zelli has been using to sell, well, the people he's been selling to, which is from editorial boards of newspaper to chambers of commerce to everybody he speaks to, down to the citizens of Minnesota. And then at the end of the presentation, I've added to that how the Metro District is going to make your life miserable on the highways, the major projects we're going to have over the next few years. So that's what I'm going to do today. So, bottom line is we know what's ahead of us right now. If you look at our system, as you all know, freight traffic is increasing. We expect a significant increase over the next 15 years in freight traffic. We know that we have bridge pavement work that needs to be done over the next number of years. 1 million new Minnesotans over the next 20 plus years. The vast majority of those in the metro area. You see the numbers there. Congestion is increasing in the metro area because of that, as you can see. Both local and state road system are overtaxed, underfunded, and you see the number of bridge and road projects that will go unfunded in this scenario. So the bottom line is commerce is good. New residents in this area are good. Those are all really good things. But years of neglect have really eroded our ability to keep up with the demand of commerce and new people in this area. So that is a fact. So we are guilty of neglecting the quality of our roads and bridges in this area. So that's the downside of all of this growth and industry. So we're on the edge of a fiscal cliff here, and I kind of like this slide. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. This is a great slide. It shows we are on the edge of a fiscal cliff here. So funding drops 18% just next year. This is the actual funding in fiscal year 2015. 2016 it drops 18%. By fiscal year 19 it drops by 49%. So here's a little secret. Guess when the St. Croix River crossing at $330 million was let? This fiscal year 15. So Commissioner kind of cooked the books a little bit because fiscal year 15 was one of those really big years based on chapter 152 funding. So don't tell anybody that, by the way. That's my secret to you. But it is a true statement that funding, there is a fiscal cliff. If you think about the transportation bill that was passed in 2008, had a lot of bonding in it, and it had a gas tax increase. That bonding expires in 2018. So we ramped up and spent all of that bonding, most all of that bonding, by about 2015-16. There's a little bit left to go. So there is a spike in funding that hit about 2015. Well, that's all gone now. So we essentially used up that bonding money. And so funding falls off the cliff. So that's the decrease you see there. So what does that mean for us? Of course, maintenance suffers from that. We go back to a lot of shorter term fixes, mill and overlay projects instead of unbonded concrete projects that last 30 to 40 years. Limited resources again for expansion and mobility type improvements. So here's a slide. This is a new slide that I took just recently. It's not in his PowerPoint deck yet. So this is brand new. This is what inflation actually does to us. If you look at our revenue, this is our revenue over the next 20 years. This is 2037, so it's a 20-year look at our revenue. Our revenue is actually going up. If you look at the main sources of our revenue, our gas tax revenue is increasing, but just barely, by like 1% a year. So it's just barely increasing because vehicle miles traveled are pretty flat. Cars are more efficient. So gas tax revenue is just barely increasing. The license tab fees and sales tax, they're both increasing slightly more than that. So our revenue is actually increasing, but if you look at the effect of inflation on that, this is actually the effect of our buying power on that. So inflation is increasing faster than all three of those combined. So if you look at our buying power, it's about half of what the revenue increase would actually suggest. So our buying power is actually going down. That's a big part of our look at our system and our ability to actually to improve our system. Our buying power is actually decreasing quite a bit. Now, I want to, this is a 2-slide set here. This is a 20-year look at how we're actually spending our money. And it actually will illustrate how pavement needs could actually dominate and take over the rest of our budget. So this is the whole state of Minnesota spending here. And the green from about 12 o'clock all the way around here is what we are spending in the next 20 years on infrastructure preservation. So this slice is pavement preservation, about half. This is bridge preservation, and this is the rest of the roadside infrastructure. So that's about $1.5 billion on the rest of the stuff that's not pavement and bridge. You all understand that, but I don't think the average public does. That's drainage structures, signals, overhead lighting, noise walls, retaining walls. It's all those other appurtenances next to the road. So about 3/4 of it we're spending on that. This is traveler safety. This is Twin Cities mobility. Right here, $520 million is all we're spending in the next 20 years for mobility in the metro area. Bicycle infrastructure, little bitty piece. Accessible pedestrian, so ADA type improvements, small piece. This is regional and community improvement priorities. So those are generally outstate. When we get into Main Street of a small community, we'll spend money there to try to improve that. And this is project support. So that's typically, when we do a project, it's consulting spending, it's right-of-way that we purchase, and it's supplemental agreements when we get into a construction project. And these are just small programs, various small programs. So that's how the pie is currently built right today and how we're spending our money. If we were to maintain our pavements to today's level and just keep them the same way condition they are today, this is what that pie would look like over the next 20 years. So we would need to spend this much money on pavements alone, essentially crowding out all other investments. Of course, we wouldn't do that because we have to maintain a minimum level of investments to keep our bridges standing, for instance. But this is just to illustrate what it would take just to keep our pavements in the same condition that they are today. So essentially what we will be forced to do is let pavements go to heck. That's what it amounts to. In order to keep bridges standing, to spend some level of money on ADA improvements, bridge improvements, other infrastructure that's in trouble. So that's just an illustration of how bad the situation actually is. So I mentioned we all agree on the need. Storm clouds on the horizon. So if you go around the wheel, talked about the aging infrastructure. We know what's happening at the federal area. You know, the federal funding we say is uncertain. Well, we got a 5-year bill, so it's certain, but there is no more additional money. Yeah, there's a slight increase. It's a little emphasis on freight, but so we know for 5 years what our funding's going to be, but we know what the debate is like at the federal level for, say, a nickel gas tax or some increased revenue. That's not happening. So we know there's no additional revenue coming from the federal government. We know that we have increased costs for construction and maintenance. So increased costs for construction, we know what inflation is doing to us. We know that maintenance, it's more expensive for us to maintain roads in poor condition than it is to maintain roads in good condition. We know what increasing fuel efficiency and flat is doing to us. And we know what increased population and freight shipment does to us as well. So we know all that. And we also know that people expect us to deliver transportation as an essential service to them. So everybody agrees on that. And yet we look at our system, 50% of our pavements are greater than 50 years old right now. 35% of our bridges are greater than 35 years old right now. 20% of our system has less than 3 years of useful life remaining in them. And over the next 10 years, without any new funding, we'll have nearly 3,000 miles of our state roads will have 0 remaining service life in them. So essentially, they'll be in a condition where they need to be reconstructed. And in the metro area, of course, with new people coming in, congestion will worsen. We just have no mobility money to put into congestion. So that congestion will worsen. So if you look at what we need to do, one thing we don't need to do is study this some more. We don't need to study it anymore. We've agreed on the need. And so if you look at the debate that's happening out there, you look at the governor's plan, you constantly hear these words right here. Trying to get some sort of a long-term sustainable plan in place. Because we need a long-term sustainable plan that we can all work towards. Because it takes a long time to develop a transportation project and get it through the public process, get it through the design process, get it through the environmental process, and we need to know the money's going to be there that 4 or 5 years later so that we all can get through that process. It needs to be predictable. And so the plan that the governor has signed on to is looking for $6 billion for the state system and nearly $2.5 billion for the local system. That's what the dedicated fuel tax would do. And here's something that I think I mentioned earlier, ITE changing the T from traffic to transportation. We all in the room have always known about these middle 3 bullets. You know, we all want to enhance safety, maintain the infrastructure, reduce costs with fixes. That's the engineering. That's the traffic part of the equation. But if you look at the other 2, we changed the name from traffic to transportation because of these other 2 things. Why are we doing that? It's not for cars. It's not because engineering is cool and we like pavements and bridges. We like concrete. It's because of economic development. It's because of the people that use them. It's because people have to go to jobs, get to what they want to do. It's because we have a system, not because we like the system, because it's cool doing what we do. It's because people use the system for a reason. That's why we have the system. It's a transportation system that supports people. It supports economic development. It supports jobs. That's why we're all doing what we're doing. So that's why we need to do this system. And if you look at what's happened recently, this small print up here, you probably can't read it in the back. These laws were enacted between February 15th of 2013 and November of 2015. These are state gas tax increases and inflation adjustments just in the last 18 months or so. All of these states have done some sort of a gas tax adjustment or increase. And if you look at them, 11 of the 17 states up there were within the last year, including 8 Republican-controlled states. I should have probably mentioned to you earlier, I am going to talk about politics for the squeamish. I'm going to talk a little bit about politics. I'm not going to get political on you, but I am going to be honest in my assessment of what's going on. And I'm not going to be political about things, but I'm going to talk about politics here. So these are Republican-controlled governorships and legislatures, and yet they're taxing themselves. Minnesota can't seem to do that right now. And I've got a theory about that. And if I get wound up enough, I might let you know what that theory is. But this map right here proves this can and is a bipartisan issue. But the politics in this state is getting in the way of actually making that happen. Threw this slide in because I wanted to just show the balance. I've talked so far about just kind of the highway component of this, but I just wanted to show the balance in the governor's plan. So if you look at this side, this is the highway piece that I've talked about. It's the road and bridge piece. So this would come through the wholesale gas tax that is part of the governor's plan. So that would be split, state, city, county, coming through the gas tax, and the state aid system. There's multimodal, non-motorized piece of that, and then of course the transit component. There's a sales tax component of that for transit. Sales tax in the metro area would fund the transit system, the build out of the transit system as proposed by the Metropolitan Council. And then there's a greater Minnesota transit piece of that. So the big part about this is it's balanced, and it's politically balanced as well. It's rural urban, it's transit highways, it's highways non-motorized. I mean, it's balanced kind of every which way you look at it. And so that's the theory here, is that it's balanced, it's got something for everything. So that's the theory there. And say another thing about the governor's plan. If you look at the status quo, and I won't read all of this to you, because I've kind of talked about what doing nothing actually means. But I did want to make the point that what the governor's plan does do, it does not buy everything for everybody, because the need is so great out there. It's not trying to solve all congestion. It's not trying to fix every road. None of us can afford all of that. So what it's actually trying to do is just to simply preserve and modernize. Those are kind of the key words. Really meet our preservation needs, modernize some, and strategically expand some of the system. So it's not trying to do everything. We can't afford that, to try to eliminate congestion. That's not in the cards. We're not trying to do that. So that's just the point of that. So just a few words about modernization, and to show you some stuff you all like. And these slides are for really meant for kind of the general public that doesn't know these kinds of things. But you've all seen black bar, and you know what that does to bridges in Minnesota. We used to build bridges with black bars. Salt leaches down into bridges, and these bridge decks wound up lasting 20 to 30 years, as opposed to putting epoxy in that lasts a lot longer. And now some of our major river crossings, we're putting stainless steel bars in those. And they're extremely expensive, but we expect them to last 75 to 100 years. And galvanized pipe versus aluminized pipe is another example of that. A lot of traffic folks in here, the old high pressure sodium versus LED. I just looked at our utility bill in Metro District. We spend 2013, 2014, we spent about $2.1 million lighting our highways in those years. Last year in 2015, we were down to about $1.9 million because we implemented some LED. So we've already saved about $250,000 this last fiscal year. This fiscal year, I don't have numbers. It's about we're about three quarters of the way through, but we're saving considerably more than that $250,000 this fiscal year. So we're saving it's probably closer to $100,000 a month on just LED lights now. So we're saving a bunch of money. And this is just an example of transportation for the people. Rather than just fixing the pavement because the pavement is bad, fix the pavement and make it work for people that actually want to use the roadway. Another example, preservation job, reclaim it, 10 years later, you need to do it over again. This is a reconstruction, 10 years later, you don't need to do much yet on that roadway if you reconstruct the roadway. Here's where we get into a little bit of difference between the two plans. So again, a lot of words on here. The governor's plan I kind of went through. What the funding does, what the allocations do. The houses, the GOP's house plan is over here. And just in short, the difference between the two is the GOP's plan, the big one is right here. $7 billion over 10 years, $4 billion of that, so a good portion of that, almost 60% comes from the general fund. And I believe that plan came out last year when there was a projected $2 billion surplus. That surplus is now down to about $900 million, with everybody and their brother and sister making claims on it right now. So I'm guessing that has shrunk considerably. And this general fund, as you know, it's got to come from somewhere. So where's that going to come from? Education, or as I like to say, old people, children. Who are you going to take that money from? That's set up for a fight right there. So essentially what that does is this plan does not fill the gap that's needed, and it comes from non-dedicated general fund sources. So what has to happen if we went with that plan is we would be back at the legislature in 2 years and over again, asking for more money again and again, rather than having that dedicated, sustainable, reliable source of funds. And if it's coming from that general fund, you're going to be competing with children, old people, and other general fund sources constantly. So that's the debate that's being set up right there. And so, and I will get a little bit, I'll tell you my theory now and why I don't think it's really going to work for us this year. 2 years ago in the legislature, we had a all Democratic legislature, leadership in the House and the Senate. Do we have any legislators here today? By the way?
They could have signed up for the web streaming.
Okay, so I'll tenor my comments a little bit. No, I won't. But here's what happened 2 years ago. There were a lot of tax increases passed 2 years ago. And there are some people that are not happy about all those taxes. In particular, we tax the wealthy. And the Chamber of Commerce is not happy about all of those taxes that were increased last year. And they are not supporting a transportation tax increase this year. And so that's what it would take to do this plan on this side. It would take that tax increase. So the governor has said he's willing to look at compromise. He's willing to look at some of these things. So propose them, he's willing to look at them. But they haven't come forward yet with this. And frankly, I don't think they will come forward with much of anything for that. So that's my theory. So I've been saying all along that I think the best that we can hope for, no new source of revenue, the best that we can hope for is some possible one-time funding, maybe coming out of the surplus, possible funding coming out of MnDOT's got some room against our bonding cap. We have a 20% debt limit policy, and there's some room there to potentially borrow some more money. But you know what happens when you borrow money, right? You got to pay it back. So that's not new money, that's just a credit card. It's an okay thing to do, but we have to pay that back. So you could potentially see if they can get together at all, which they haven't shown much propensity to want to do that at all. They could possibly get together and pass some small bill with some hundreds of millions of dollars that sounds like something, but really isn't in the grand scheme of things, and hand that to us and say, here, build a few projects with that. So if I was betting 3 months ago, I would have bet on that. Today, I don't know that I'd even bet on that, given what I've seen in the rhetoric today. So I'm not sure that I would even bet on that right now. I might just hold my money. So that's my editorial on the state of politics today. I would have bet on that a while back, but I'm not sure now. So those are the plan comparisons. How are we doing on time? Okay, just focus on what that plan, what the governor's plan says about Metro. And I mentioned earlier that it doesn't try to solve congestion. It can't do that because the preservation needs are so great. So essentially what that would do is allow us to upgrade some of the interchanges that we have that are a problem. And as an example, one of those is 35W 494. Doesn't allow us to fix the whole thing, but we've been talking about one of the movements in particular. This is it right here. One of the movements in particular from northbound, coming from the south, if you're northbound, the movement that would take you around to westbound, call it a turbine, we'd be able to build that part of the movement. Because today there's a clover leaf on this side, and that bottles up both this direction and this direction. So taking this movement out of that would free up both of those directions, at least for a good portion of the time. So that's a project that would cost $60 to $80 million probably, and would allow you to do something like that, just to try to do something here. Would not allow you to do this whole plan, but it would allow you to do something here. Would allow us to complete our min-pass system. We have 5 remaining min-pass lanes that are not built yet. Would allow us to build those. Looking at rebuilding 94 between the downtowns, that's bad pavement. We have, guess how many bridges we have between I-394 and Highway 61, just to the east of St. Paul. How many bridges? Anybody? It's over 100. In fact, it's just under 150 bridges, 145 bridges from Highway 55 to Highway 61. 145 bridges in that stretch. Guess when they were all built? All at the same time. And they were all built about 1968. Somewhere in that time frame. Guess how old they are? Almost as old as me. So yeah, so all of that infrastructure is coming due, and that's not to mention the continuously reinforced concrete pavement. That was a good experiment back when it was done, but it was just an experiment, and it's really bad. We can't hold it together. All of that pavement needs to go. And then we would try to advance some big infrastructure that's sitting out there. 35W Minnesota River Bridge between Bloomington and Burnsville is one that's sitting out in 2020. We try to move that up a year or two if we could. We've got some other big infrastructure that needs to move as well. We've got other mobility interchange improvements. Highway 10 up in Ramsey is an example of that. It's just an example. We've got other pieces along around the metro area that we've been picking off with programs like TED, our TED program, and SIMS that we work with our local partners on. It would allow us to do a lot of those types of things. So these are examples of the kinds of things we would be able to get done in Metro with a funding increase. So again, why? Businesses, being able to move people efficiently, reducing congestion, safety, and fix our system for future generations. So the kinds of things that we can all do to help, and this is again what the commissioner asks for, is people to get involved and just harass their legislators about this. Letters, emails, conversations, When the Transportation Alliance does their thing, get involved with them. So get involved with the people that matter, the people that are making the votes. So now I want to shift gears and get into major projects coming up. And this season is upon us right now. We do have some things that are going to make our lives miserable. The big one, this was in the start trip this morning, I-94 on the east side of town is going to start up. It's a big pavement preservation project. So we got some bridge repair, but it's an unbonded overlay from Mounds to 120 and from 61 to Burns, way out to 5. It's a $40+ million project, and it will make life miserable. I'm going to come back to that one in just a minute. On the west side of town, Highway 100, that's the second year. Oh no, this is actually another piece of Highway 100 that we're adding to the second year of the 100 project in St. Louis Park. This is just south of that down to 494. Since we've got Highway 100 under construction, we're going to add another piece of pavement down to 494. Highway 494 out in the Plymouth, Minnetonka area, year 2 of 2. And then Highway 36 at Lexington, we're going to replace the bridge there right by the water's edge office. And then on 694, this is Corridors of Commerce project, we're going to add a lane between Rice and Lexington. So that's kind of finishing off all that work we did on 694. I'm going to come back to that in a second also. And then 35E Min Pass, this is the second year of the extension of the Min Pass lane north from essentially 694 north to J. And so you might notice on the east side of town, we're going to work on 94, 36, and 694 all at the same time. You might be thinking, what in the hell are you doing? We kind of thought that same thing. Actually, what we thought is we should go down and work on 494 too. But what we decided, we thought about that. What we ultimately decided is on every one of those routes, we're going to maintain the same number of lanes, with the exception of 94. We're going to go down to 2 lanes in each direction, but we're going to have a movable barrier there, and the movable barrier will allow us the third lane in the direction of traffic, in the peak direction each time. And then we'll move the barrier back to allow access to the work zone for workers after the peak hour. So we felt like we could actually do that. On 36, we're going to drop the Lexington Bridge, close Lexington. We're going to take 2 lanes of traffic down the ramps, back up the ramps with a closed Lexington. So we felt like, well, they're all 3 under construction at the same time. We're going to do it. You heard it here first. And I will get letters, by the way. 2017, it's a big year because we're closing 169 just north of Crosstown. We've got a big project on I-94. This is from the tunnel, basically, north up to 252. And this will be a big one for us. We will have to close, if I have my directions right, the northbound bridge, the 94 bridge the 94 northbound bridge that goes over, not sure what it goes over, not 252, maybe it is 252, southbound 252. So we have to actually close that bridge for a period of time. And then, you think these are bad, we start up the big one. This is 35W at Lake Street. We start this project. Oh, I should mention, we closed the 169 bridge the week after we open 494 and Highway 100 projects. So we finish up those projects, allow people to breathe for a week, and then shut down 169, maybe a weekend. And then, while we have 169 shut, we let 35W at Lake Street. And this is, I'm going to let you in on a secret here too. This we're calling a 3-year project. We're actually getting nervous that we're going to be able to do this in 3 years. we're struggling with that right now. So we're going to try to get some extraordinary measures here to try to figure out how we can do this as quickly as possible. This is about a $250 million project, all the pavement from 42nd up to I-94, a bunch of bridges. It's a big one. This one, we feel like we can start while this is closed, because this will be let in July. So it's just the last half will just be set up work. And so the major work won't start until 2018. And then 169 will be back open again that fall. So in 2018, that one will be going full speed at 35W mid-pass completion. And this 35W project is north, so it goes from the 35 east split up to Highway 8. We're going to redeck the High Bridge, so the High Bridge will be closed. That's in 2018 as well. 2019, this is down south, 169 overlay down south. A small project to do the bridges at the east system interchange, 94, 694, 494. That will also do a little mobility improvement there as well. And then an unbonded overlay in Lino. And then with any kind of luck, we'll be starting to complete this. But as I mentioned, that's going to be a tough one for us to complete in that amount of time. Then we're going to let, this time, 35W North managed lane, so that's pavement, and put a min-pass lane from 36 up to Highway 10 on 35W. 2020 will be year 2 of that project, complete that. Some pavement repair in southeast part of the metro on 484. Go downtown Minneapolis, redeck the 3rd Avenue or Central Avenue Bridge. And then we've got this scheduled, the 35W bridge over the Minnesota River. I think this gets to be a $130 million project. We're going to try to do a bridge or a flood mitigation project on the south end to raise it up out of the floodplain. So this will probably get up closer to $150 million by the time we're done. 2021, complete that project, and then start, I'm going to call this the last mobility project. Start the 94 managed lane project between the downtowns. Finish up that project, and it's at $100 million on the last one. That's what we have in our program for mobility. I would much rather do about a $500 million project to replace all those bridges I talked about and replace the pavement, but it's not in our budget. That's a big part of the commissioner's talking points. We need to do something on 94, but it's probably a $500 million to $750 million project. It's what really needs to be done there. But all we have is $100 million, so we'll see what happens. Maybe the next district engineer will have to worry about that. Then we have just a couple of, year 3 of 3 on the River Bridge, sorry, and then a mill and overlay on 394. And then, this is my favorite project right here. I-94 from 120 to Wisconsin. We let the Packard fans go east, and we don't let them back in. We let that pavement go to hell on the other direction. So a couple of minor infrastructure projects, and this is the year you see we have no mobility down here. We're done. And with that, I am done. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Yeah, the wholesale tax on gasoline, now, things are pretty low right now at the wholesale level because of the price of crude oil. And so that looks like a good deal, it's gonna go up, but that's gonna be very volatile. And that really has no direct tie to what people are driving either. And then how's that protected by the Constitution? Or is it? I mean, the Constitution dedicates the gas tax to transportation, but is that something that could be passed around later on, or is it safe? Is that interpreted then? And would that be posted on the pumps? I have a daughter who lives in California, and you go out there, you try to figure out what the tax is on your very expensive gasoline in California. And they usually have a sticker saying, well, there's been a local sales tax added, but they never tell you what it is.
No, interesting.
So that's a complicated question.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm not a constitutional scholar on the gas tax, actually, I don't know the answer to your questions. In terms of the constitutionality and the tie between the wholesale. I do know that they talked about a floor on the wholesale gas tax. So, let's say the bottom really drops out and it drops down to, 20 cents a barrel or something.
Yeah.
They talked about a floor on that, so that it could only go so low, but no ceiling. So as it goes higher and higher, the tax, the revenue we collect on it goes higher and higher. So there was a protection on the bottom end, but that's all I know. I don't know the answer to your question.
So what happens to the gas tax revenue, went over the long term, the overall fleet started switching to electric, hybrid fuel cell, alternate sources.
Yeah, that's been one of the big debates about that, and actually that's been one of I think the Republican red herrings too. That is going to happen someday, but it hasn't yet. So what happens when the gas tax ultimately dies? Because it is a dying gas tax. It's still a strong tax, and people still want to raise the gas tax. It's still a workhorse. So that is the subject of a national debate and a local debate. So a lot of different studies have been done, mileage-based user fees, and there are other proposals now on how to kind of do away with that tax, because it is a dying tax. There will have to someday be a different tax. We'll all be driving electric cars or hydrogen fuel cell cars or some other types of cars. So that is a subject of a lot of debate. Eventually we will have to do away with that tax. It's not today, but it's not that far off. It's a big debate right now.
John, so the other day I received an interesting email from Centerpoint Energy telling me that they have been allowed to do revenue decoupling, meaning that if the price of energy, buying energy or creating energy goes down, they're not going to lose the profit because we're going to be getting extra cost on our bill, so they can keep the profit while we consume less gas. Why don't we do that? Why don't we do a revenue decoupling? We're allowing private companies to do that. Why we don't do that?
Yeah, we should probably ask people that are in charge of taxes about that. It seems like, Wisconsin had their gas tax index at one time, right? So it's kind of a hedge against inflation. So if inflation goes up, the price of your gas tax goes up. And I don't know anything about decoupling, so I can't specifically talk about that. But I know that after a very short time, their legislature removed that indexing clause because they thought it was an automatic tax increase without a vote of the legislature, which of course it is, although they actually voted to allow that a while back. But they viewed it as that tax went up automatically and nobody raised their hand and voted on that at the legislature. That's the reason they removed that tax. So I don't know if it works the same way. If our revenue goes up automatically, then there are people in the legislature that say, well, that's a tax that raised without me saying that, and so that's a wrong thing. That's not the only thing I can say to that, but there are people out there that think that. There are people on the other side of the equation that say that's just fine. That's the way the wholesale gas tax would work. As the market goes up for gas, as the price of a barrel of oil goes up and you pay more at the wholesale level, then our revenue would go up. So there are plenty of people on the other side that say, that's just fine. We get more money for roads and bridges. Excellent. Others say, well, no, that's a tax increase that we didn't vote for, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, well, that's the difference between a revenue increase and a tax increase. The tax is a percent, right? They voted on that. I can see where the
Yeah.
Wisconsin one would bother people because the percentage that goes up, the price per gallon goes up. But if you actually, I mean,
So I come back to,
I
Why is
understand
it
what the
bothering
argument is, but I don't agree with it.
why is it bothering them? And, so I come back to my theory, we taxed the rich a while back, so everything's gonna bother them.
In all the discussions about these different funding scenarios, if you have any feelings on where the funding scenarios might go for local state aid, for municipal state aid or county state aid, and does the legislature have an interest in robbing Peter to pay Paul to help cover MnDOT's shortfall by taking away from that gas tax distribution to the locals?
Yeah, the gas tax, that distribution is in the Constitution, so that can't be changed. And that's why I think the locals like the governor's proposal, because that wholesale gas tax goes right to the Highway User Trust Fund, which is constitutionally dedicated, so it's got that formula in it, which is why when you looked at that flow chart, the money came down into so much came into the state portion and so much came into the local government. That's where that balance came from. That's one I didn't mention, it's balance state and local as well. So it's really balanced. The downside of not going with a proposal like that and reaching this compromise on a small piece would be, most of that would probably all come to MnDOT. And it would just be a MnDOT thing as opposed to raising revenue, which would go into the Highway User Trust Fund, which is split then between state and local sources. That's the beauty of raising that gas tax revenue or license fees or all of those sources that go right into that trust fund. The trust fund is split between us and you. Anything that doesn't do that and goes directly to us in the form of trunk highway bonding or something like that goes directly to us. So it's not balanced between state and local sources. And so that's the difference between those kinds of proposals. I think that's the beauty of a revenue raising scenario, because it's balanced across the local and the state lines. And we know that you guys need money just as badly as we do on the local system. And that's, the governor's plan recognizes that. Steve.
Yeah, and my question was going to be, the numbers you shared with us today are basically the state budget, right? In other words, if we had some cost estimates for everything we needed for the entire state, what we would call transportation infrastructure, there are no county budgets in here, there are no municipal budgets.
The governor's budget does recognize city and county transportation needs. Yeah, it does recognize that.
Okay.
So if we go back a few slides here.
That's, okay, there we go. So the 10.6 billion is some sort of a statewide requirement.
Yeah, the 10.6 billion includes transit funding, it includes local funding, and it includes state highway funding as well. So it's got those three components in it.
That's just for state aid.
That's just state aid. That's revenue that would be generated, revenue generated from several different sources. One is the wholesale gas tax, plus there is, I don't know them all, but I do know that there are license tab fee increases in there and several other sources that go into the highway trust fund that is split between state and local governments. It includes the half-cent sales tax that goes to transit. It includes something, I don't remember what, that goes to Greater Minnesota Transit as well. So it includes a number of different revenue
Okay,
sources.
so this is,
There is.
what you're telling me is the state aid's included here. That's not my question. My question is,
Correct.
what are the counties and the municipalities going to be spending their own money?
It does not include that.
Okay.
That is correct. They've got their normal sources that they use. In fact, many of them are passing their own tax increases as well. Scott County recently passed their own, what did they pass, a quarter or a half cent tax? It's here from Scott County, but
Well, that leaves some maneuverability for the local units of government. The way that Rochester got an incredible project that wasn't really badly needed was that they came up with their own part of the funding. And so we're going to continue, talk about the politics of it, we're going to continue to see that. My other question was, what happens to the old argument that was always popular in my days, that you dedicated 30 to 35% of the resources to 5% of the demand?
say that again.
The numbers that you had for the split between the highways and the transit and the pedestrian, okay, is roughly 30% of the total resources were going to the transit and the pedestrian side. That, in my day, that only counted for 5% of the total demand during the day. Did anybody worry about that anymore?
A lot of people do, actually. And that's a big part of the debate is what money is going where. I mean, that's a huge part of the debate. Look at who's wanting to fund Southwest LRT state share and who's not wanting to
And I
fund
see that,
that state share.
that realization is coming up when they look at those numbers for that particular facility.
Yeah, and also look at, and I think a big part of the equation that's different than, let's just say, back in the day, is look at the amount of mobility we're gonna build in the system over the next 20 plus years. It's not much. We can't afford it. And we're just not gonna build a lot of mobility. When I look back at let's look back at the last 50 years since we're old. We started building the interstate system back in 1960 or so, and we built capacity like it was going out of style. We built capacity through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s. At that point, we were just about done with the interstate system. Just had to finish a little bit at 394 at that point, but we didn't stop building capacity. We still had to build Shakopee Bypass, 610. We were still building capacity to beat the band. We were expanding highways right and left. We were expanding the interstate system still. We were expanding the system through the 90s. We were still expanding the system through the 2000s. We just slowed down. At about 2010, we started slowing down, and we're just about done expanding the system now. We're not going to be expanding the system much anymore. We can't afford it. We can't afford the right of way. People won't tolerate it. Taking out a row of houses. We can't afford to take a row of houses. So we're done expanding the system. So what are we going to do with another 800,000 people in the next 20 years on this system? I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but the roads are getting crowded now. It's hell driving around here. In fact, I'm moving from Plymouth to St. Paul this year because I'm tired of driving around. I drive a lot. I'm tired of driving in the traffic, so I'm actually moving my house.
Hey, that's what we wanted to do.
Yep.
Council.
And you know what I want? I want a transit system that would work for me, that I can ride around.
I don't think you want a train system to go back.
No, I'm not going back to Plymouth. So I'd love a transit system that would work for me like an actual big city. So I'm done building highways. You saw the presentation there. If we get a bunch more money, you'd have to give me a $2.50 a gallon gas tax increase for this region to go back to building highways the way we were building highways years ago. That is not going to happen. Not going to happen. So we'd be lucky to get a dime. And all we're going to do is fix our pavements, mostly in upstate Minnesota, tweak our system here, build a few min-pass lanes, and hopefully fix these big bridges that we have left. We're done. That's all we're going to do. So we need to build a transit system for these 800,000 people that want to live here. We need to build alternatives and wait till we get autonomous cars.
One last thing, I gotta compliment you, okay? You got a bigger problem to explain than Bill Crawford ever did, and you've done a wonderful job.
Thank you, sir. Now that's something I can use.
now. So Scott, we'd like to thank you for coming and speaking with us. It's a great presentation. Little mug for you.
My
So
pleasure.
everyone can,
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
thanks everyone.
Awesome. Yeah, good stuff. There you go. Get that stuff out of here. What's that? Yeah. Let's get through. You got it. Yeah, worked well. I need a stopper on this so it doesn't roll.